Next on Tom Osborne, a look back at the legacy. The Hall of Fame coach reflects on the 20th anniversary of his 1997 national championship season. The miracle catch to help beat Missouri. The win over Peyton Manning and Tennessee in the Orange Bowl. And his decision to retire after 25 years as the head football coach at Nebraska. It's all next on Tom Osborne, a look back at the legacy. Sponsored by Huber Cadillac. Now, here's Sports Director Ross Jernstrom.
Good evening and happy Thanksgiving. 20 years ago, the 1997 Nebraska football team finished the season undefeated and claimed the 5th national title in school history. The 1997 season also marked Tom Osborne's final season on the Huskers sideline. Last October, Nebraska celebrated the 20th anniversary of the national championship team with a reunion. Coach Osborne and the players entered Memorial Stadium before the kickoff of the Wisconsin-Nebraska game. Let's look back at that memorable season. Nebraska was coming off an 11-2 season and a win in the Orange Bowl. The Huskers entered the 1997 season ranked 6th in the nation. But head coach Tom Osborne knew he would have a national championship contender with the return of 2 key players on defense. I recently sat down with the Hall of Fame coach and looked back at that memorable season.
Well, I thought it'd be a good team. Didn't know for sure. You never know exactly how chemistry is going to occur. But a big key to this team was the fact that Grant Wistrom and Jason Peter came back for their senior year. You know, it appeared they would be first-round picks at the end of their junior year, and they came in to see me in January, and they said, "Well, we're coming back. We didn't like what happened in '96. We lost 2 games, which for most people would have been still a pretty good year, and but they said we want to come back, win them all, and." So they provided a lot of leadership, you know, during spring ball, summer conditioning, and of course during the season itself. And they were both great players, and so that was a big factor.
The Husker offense returned some key players too. Quarterback Scott Frost, I-back Amon Green, and All-American center Aaron Taylor.
As usual, we had to replace some offensive linemen. Did a good job of it. And I think we only had 3 starters back on defense, and of course they were good players. We had Wistrom, and we had Jason Peter, and we had Ralph Brown at cornerback. And so you know, there's a fair amount of rebuilding, but it went well for us.
After a sluggish game against Central Florida, Nebraska dropped to 7th in the polls. The Huskers traveled to Seattle to face 2nd-ranked Washington. Nebraska set the tone with an 80-yard drive to open the game. Quarterback Scott Frost raced 34 yards to the end zone. Coach Tom Osborne had turned the former Stanford quarterback into an option quarterback.
I think the fact that Scott had a year under his belt, you know, he'd been at Stanford, and that was more of a drop-back passing scheme, and then he transferred back and had to spend a year on a scout team because we couldn't really prepare him because he wasn't eligible to play. And so the '96 season, he played well, but we weren't probably quite as good a team that year. Lost 2, but he played really well in '97.
Frost scored again on a 30-yard run to put the Huskers up 14-0. The Husker quarterback rushed for 97 yards and passed for 88 in the 27-14 upset over the Huskies.
And that's always a tough place to play because of their stadium and the fans. And we played well. Scott had a really good game, and we took care of him pretty well and beat a good team on the road. And that kind of launched us, I think, a little bit higher in terms of national perspective, that we were a team to be reckoned with.
The win over Washington vaulted the Huskers to number 3 in the polls. The Huskers ran off 4 straight wins. Then on November 1st, Nebraska hosted their longtime rival, Oklahoma. The Husker Blackshirts forced 4 fumbles and Nebraska cruised to a 69-7 victory over the Sooners. It was the most lopsided victory in the series' 78-game history. The victory also gave Tom Osborne his 250th win in 25 seasons. Coach Osborne reached the 250-win plateau faster than any coach in college history.
It was a great series over a long period of time. And I think there were a period of about 30 years where I think at least 28 times that game decided the conference championship. And often, probably a third of the time, it had pretty serious national championship implications. If whoever won that game was going to be in a pretty good position to either play for or win a national championship.
Coach Osborne and the Huskers raised their record to 8-0 on the season and were now #1 in the polls. But a road trip to Missouri was on the horizon with a miracle catch. That's next.
You're watching the Tom Osborne, a look back at the legacy half-hour special, sponsored by Huber Cadillac. You're watching the Tom Osborne, a look back at the legacy half-hour special, sponsored by Huber Cadillac.
Coach Osborne and the Huskers were on a roll heading to Columbia, where they would face an unranked Missouri team. But the Tigers were ready for an upset. Missouri quarterback Corby Jones gave the Nebraska defense fits all day. He accounted for 4 touchdowns and gave Missouri a 38-31 lead with 1 minute and 2 seconds left in regulation. Nebraska started a drive on their own 33-yard line with no timeouts and drove downfield.
We hit 2 or 3 passes and got down close, somewhere around the 10-yard line, and called a double slant, which meant we had 4 wide receivers and everybody was running a slant. And I think Scott looked to the left, which was his primary read, and I think Matt Davidson was covered over there, and so we went back to Shevin Wiggins, who was running a slant. If Shevin had caught the ball, Scott hit him at about the 1-yard line, and I would hope that he might have fallen into the end zone, but it's one of those deals where he might not have made it, and so he didn't make the catch, and the ball kind of bounced off his chest. And on the way down, he kicked the ball up in the air, and Matt Davidson was coming in from the other side on the slant pattern, and the ball was there, and he caught it, and caught it about a foot off the ground, and so that tied the score. And then we went into overtime. In overtime, there was no contest. I mean, we went right down and scored, and then we sacked their quarterback, and they didn't come close. So we won the game.
After needing overtime to pull out a 45-38 victory over Missouri, Nebraska dropped to #2 in the polls. The Huskers cruised past Iowa State and closed out the regular season with a trip to Boulder. Colorado fell behind 27-10, but the Buffs rallied with 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter and pulled to within a field goal of Nebraska. The Huskers held on to win it 27-24.
We just made a mistake or two there and let it get tight. But anyway, they had a good team that year, and it's never easy to play in Boulder, and so it was good to win that game.
Nebraska faced 14th-ranked Texas A&M for the Big 12 championship at the Alamo Dome in San Antonio. Quarterback Scott Frost and the Husker offense scored on their first 7 possessions and opened up a 37-3 lead in the first half. The Husker Blackshirts sacked the Aggies quarterback Brandon Stewart 6 times to win their first Big 12 championship, 54-15.
They had a quarterback named Stewart and at A&M, and we recruited him. We thought he was a really good player, and he'd gone to Tennessee, and so he and Peyton Manning came in same time at Tennessee, and he began to see that he wasn't going to be able to beat Tennessee or beat Peyton out, so he transferred to A&M, and they had a good team, and but we went down there and played really well and won the Big 12 championship.
The win over the Aggies guaranteed the Huskers a spot in the Orange Bowl against third-ranked Tennessee. But a stunning announcement from the head coach was just days away.
You're watching the Tom Osborne, a look back at the legacy half-hour special, sponsored by Huber Cadillac. You're watching the Tom Osborne, a look back at the legacy half-hour special, sponsored by Huber Cadillac.
4 days after winning the Big 12 championship, Tom Osborne announced his retirement. The nation's winningest coach turned the reins over to his longtime assistant, Frank Solich.
Well, it really had to do with a promise I had made to Frank Solich. Frank had a job offer, and I told Frank, I said, you know, I think that probably another 5 years that I'll be ready to hang it up, and I'd like to have you take over. And those 5 years came and went, and then that was the end of the '96 season, and had Jernstrom and Peter come in and say, you know, we're coming back. We want to win another championship. And I didn't think it'd be right for those guys if they came back and gave up a first-round draft pick for me to say, well, I'm leaving at this point. So I asked Frank, I said, you know, would it be okay if I coach one more year, even though I had promised you this? And he said that'd be fine. And so I coached that year, so it was actually 6 years, not 5. And and we had a great team and a good way to end it. And I felt Frank deserved that opportunity. We were in a position where I could probably name my successor, which very seldom happens.
Nebraska headed to the Orange Bowl to face third-ranked Tennessee. Meanwhile, in the Rose Bowl, top-ranked and undefeated Michigan took on seventh-ranked Washington State. Coach Osborne thought the door was still open to being number one.
I thought, and I told the players this, I thought we had a good chance to do that, because if you looked at the talent level, Tennessee had a number of great players. And of course, subsequently, Peyton Manning has proven himself to be maybe as good a quarterback as ever played, at least in the NFL, and was a great college quarterback. But they had Peerless Price, and they had Jamal at running back there, who was a first-round pick. I think they had 4 or 5 first-rounders on their team, and probably were more talented than Michigan.
Top-ranked Michigan won the Rose Bowl with a 21-16 victory over Washington State to finish the season undefeated. But the Wolverines had struggled. It did not look impressive. If Nebraska could dominate, Coach Osborne felt the Huskers would take at least a share of the title.
We played well at night. We ran the ball really well. We threw the ball pretty well. And I remember coming out early in the game, they decided to really stack their defense against the run. They had everybody within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. And I think maybe the first series we didn't do very well, and so we told Scott, okay, we're going to throw it. And we completed our first 4 passes. And all of a sudden they backed off. They backed out of it and started playing a traditional defense, which was a real mistake on their part. If they just stayed with it, I don't know if we'd have beaten them as bad as we did, but once they went into a more traditional defense, we started chewing them up on the ground, and our defense played well. And so we played really well against a very good football team.
The Huskers sent Coach Osborne into retirement with a dominating 42-17 victory. The win ended one of the most successful eras in college football. In a 5-year span, Nebraska had a record of 60-3. After the game, Nebraska was voted number 1 in the coaches poll by just 4 points over Michigan. Coach Osborne ended his coaching career as a national champion.
I think the coaches probably tend to look a little bit more at, well, you know, who do you really think had the best team, and which team would you really be most concerned about trying to beat? And they voted for Nebraska, and of course the writers voted for Michigan. And Possibly there was a little bit of a sentimental thing in that Michigan hadn't won a national championship for 49 years, and we just won two the previous, not the previous year, but 2 years before that we'd won a couple. And so, you know, those things are, it was just really a shame that we couldn't play. And I was really upset, somewhat irate, because the big problem was that the Big Ten had this tie-up with the Rose Bowl, and they were not going to fudge one bit on that. You know, we'd have been glad to go out and play in the Rose Bowl. We'd been glad to play them anywhere, and but that couldn't happen. And so I think maybe partly that game was what spurred on the BCS, the idea that, well, let's not have two undefeated teams at the end where there's a lot of controversy.
Osborne was only 60 years old when he retired from coaching. He was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. But more coaching offers came in. It was decision time for Tom Osborne when we come back.
You're watching the Tom Osborne, a look back at the legacy half-hour special, sponsored by Huber Cadillac. You're watching the Tom Osborne, a look back at the legacy half-hour special, sponsored by Huber Cadillac.
After coaching football for 36 years, Tom Osborne was at a crossroads in his career. Politics was in the future, but he still had a passion for football, and coaching offers were starting to come in.
Yeah, I really missed football badly first couple years, and entertained the possibility of going back and coaching. I had a firm offer from Michigan State and from Houston, and Houston had a lot of money. Michigan State had some tradition, and two things stopped me. One was family. You know, my children and grandchildren were here. That wasn't in the cards. And then also I didn't really feel right about coaching someplace other than Nebraska. Then thought I had another push left in me, and so when Bill Barrett retired as 3rd District Congressman, I ran for 3rd District Congressman and got elected there and spent 6 years in Washington. And
after his political career, Osborne returned to the University of Nebraska in 2007 and served as athletic director for 5 years. Osborne continues to remain active in his teammates mentoring program, which he and his wife Nancy started in 1991 and serves over 7,500 youth. At the age of 80, Osborne says his legacy is still unwritten.
I guess the last chapter's never written until it's over. And but I've always thought, Ross, that it's a danger to worry about your legacy. Sometimes you see presidents, you see politicians who start doing things because they're concerned about their legacy. And in the meantime, and I think when you start worrying about how you're going to be perceived, you know, how this looks, you really become less effective. Teammates, you know, that's really important to me, because over those 36 years of coaching, I saw so many changes occur in our culture. So if we can help some kids along, we want to try to do that. So that's where I spend my time now, and that's probably going to be the last chapter. I don't think there's anything else out there for me, and hope we finish strong in that area.
Tom Osborne has lived a remarkable life on and off the field for the state of Nebraska. Thank you, Coach, and thank you for joining us for Tom Osborne, a look back at the legacy. Good night.
You've been watching the Tom Osborne, a look back at the legacy half-hour special, sponsored by Huber Cadillac.